See. There we go. Okay, you're good to go, Adele.
Great. Okay, so this is just sort of a caveat about early conflict resolution, especially with schools. I mean, we would also say this about the county council, but we all know how difficult it is to get hold of them, to have an early conflict resolution with them. So we would suggest that you try and make appointments with staff. So like you're sat down with them in a room and they've got the time and the space to kind of give you their full attention rather than at drop-offs and pick-ups. Try and keep emails and phone calls concise and summarise what you would like them to do. But I think that's certainly what's going to be a theme is in a complaint, always make sure you're telling them what you want to do, what you want to get out of the complaint, rather than, because otherwise you'll just get an apology and is that really what you wanted? Try and give teachers about 1 week to respond, just to reflect the fact that they're quite busy. So one of the things that we do is send an agenda before a meeting, which you might like to try. So it says this is going to be the topic of the meeting, this is what we're going to be, this is what I want to discuss, and that can make sure that the staff have the necessary documents in front of them that you would like them to share with you. We would also suggest that you follow up the meeting with an email which says this is what we've talked about and this is the time frame that we have agreed that you will rectify this problem, and then you end up with an email trail, because sometimes we certainly find that our database is actually really useful because we can go back to a school and say, no, we got it recorded on our database that you agreed to this, because sometimes you get people who say, well, no, that wasn't what was agreed, and there's been some sort of miscommunication. So that's the sort of the thing that we would suggest in the initial stages before you make complaints. Releasing potential, they do mediation between for the county council and parents, but they have also offering mediation between parents and schools. Currently, either the school or the parent would have to pay for this, but they are in talks with Hampshire County Council to have this as a funded service. So it could be that you would actually be able to have proper mediation between yourself and the school. And certainly that would be helpful in some circumstances, because some circumstances we've certainly been involved in where literally the school have stopped speaking to the parent, and the parent can't get anything back from the school, and the school have become quite hostile because that relationship has then broken down. That's worth sort of noting as a possibility. So don't just tell them what they've done wrong, tell them what you want them to do about it. So we find, especially with the county council, parents will often get a letter back following a complaint, and the letter will say, yeah, we hold our hands up, you're right, we didn't complete that within the statutory deadline, sorry about that. And that's literally all the letter says, and that isn't what the parent wanted. The parent wanted them to get on and do what they were supposed to do. That the parent wasn't looking for them to just say, yeah, you're right, we didn't do it in the time frame we were supposed to. So try and specify what it is that you want and the time frame you want it to be done in the letter. In accordance with section 29 part 1 of the Education Act 2002, all maintained schools and nurseries must publish a complaints procedure. And if you are going to complain against a school or a nursery or a college, you should have a look at their complaints procedure before you write your letter of complaint. Also, what is often useful is you also have a look at their other policies. So say if you're complaining again about ongoing bullying, you might want to have a look at their anti-bullying policy to see if they've actually followed that policy when they were dealing with it. And also you might have a look at their SEND policy to see if they've actually followed that, because it's surprising how many times that they've written a policy and it's not really been followed to the letter it should have been. Try and be specific about what exactly has happened and reference any evidence that you have, and try not to refer to past issues. So I mean, we've certainly supported parents where they've referred to, my son who went for here 10 years ago, and this happened and this happened, but they're actually wanting to complain about something that's happened with their daughter like yesterday. So try not to do that, because I think that it muddies the waters a bit. So try and be really clear about what it is that has happened and what you want them to do about it. So if you go through the school's complaints procedure and actually nothing much has happened, it might have been all of their decisions have been upheld. Your next kind of thing that you can look at is complaining to the Department of Education. So you can complain to the DfE if you follow the school's complaints procedure, but you're not happy with the result, or you don't think that the complaint was dealt with properly, or if the school have stopped you from using their complaints procedure. So it might be that they've said something like, if you make a complaint, your child won't be welcome back or something. You can talk to the DfE about that. Also, if there are safeguarding issues, I know parents certainly who've raised issues with us, like about children escaping the school grounds during the school day. And if you felt they weren't handling that properly, then that child would be at risk. And you could certainly need to complain to the DfE about that. Also, if your child is missing education, so that could be that they've got mental health issues and they have not been referred for an alternative education, so they're actually receiving nothing. So you could complain about that. You can also contact Ofsted. Ofsted will not help resolve individual complaints. However, if they're getting a number of complaints regarding the same issue at the same school, then that could trigger an Ofsted inspection at that school, and then they might focus on that particular area. So if a number of parents are complaining about SEND support in a particular school, it might be that triggers an Ofsted inspection, and they might be particularly looking at SEN at that school. So I guess it's not something that might help you in the short term, but if you felt like it was an issue and you wanted to approach it to help kind of all parents in that school, in that situation, then that could be something that you could have a look at doing. So complaining to the local authority regarding Section F not being fully put in place. So basically, Section F is legally enforceable. So the county council has an overarching responsibility to ensure that Section F is being implemented in the school. In practice, often this gets delegated to the school or college that the child is attending. So the first thing you want to do is speak to them if you think that part of Section F is not being implemented. However, if this does not resolve it, then the local authority, it's their duty to ensure that it gets done. So you can contact them. And you should not be put off by, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough money, we can't do that, because it's the LA's duty to ensure that staff have correct financial resources, correct training, and that any therapy such as speech and language, occupational therapy, and anything provided by CAMS, as long as it's in Section F, is done. Okay, and they all have to commission this privately if the service cannot do it for them. So, but that is only if it is in Section F. If it's in a different section, then it doesn't have the same kind of weight. The county council doesn't have that responsibility for it. So which is why you might want to look at having some parts in different sections put into Section F if you're struggling to get them implemented. IPSI have a model letter number 6, which can actually help you in addressing this complaint, should you wish to use it. So just a caveat for that. So say you have speech therapy in your child's EHCP in Section F, and Section F says child will have access to speech therapy. Well, what does that mean? You know, that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. So you might be thinking, well, they'll see a speech therapist termly, they'll have, you know, their speech language will get reviewed, they'll have targets. But the school might be thinking, the LSA can handle that speech therapy. The speech therapist will come in yearly to give the LSA targets and to set new targets, but they don't need to see the speech therapist any more than that. The difficulty with complaining about that is that Section F is not specific enough to be enforced. So you can't say to the local authority you're not providing speech therapy termly because it doesn't say it in the EHCP. What you would then have to do is look at asking for an annual review, and at the annual review ask that the wording is tightened to specify when the child will see the speech therapist, what kind of qualifications will that speech therapist have. So instantly, if your child was deaf, you might want a speech therapist who is specific to deaf children, or if your child has Down syndrome, there are speech therapists that specialise in children with Down syndrome. And then you want it to be, where is it happening? Is it in a broom cupboard? You know, does it happen in the classroom alongside the child? And when. So especially within senior school, do you want them to miss PE or RE, or when exactly in the school day? Does it happen after or before? So ideally you want Section F to be quite tight so that it is enforceable. So that's just a caveat there in terms of trying to complain against Section F not being implemented. So you can complain to the Children's Services Department of Hampshire Council for the process for an education and health and care plan. So they are your guys if your EHCP is well overdue. It's them you complain to. So for Hampshire SENDIASS, for any assessments by the Educational Psychology Service. So if you think that the educational psychologist hasn't actually written a good report, I think some of them have been quite dodgy over lockdown because they've been virtual. So the quality of them, I think some parents have said that, you know, the quality of them is not being as good because the educational psychologist actually hasn't gone in and met the child and observed them like they would normally do. But speak to the educational psychologist first in that sort of instance and see if they will make those changes or spend some more time with your child before you complain to the county council. So if you have an EOTIS package, you could complain to the county council regarding that provision if you don't feel like it's adequate. Admission and transfer arrangements for school places and the county-wide planning of school places, which I think we might want to all complain about because of the lack of SEND spaces and the amount of people queuing to try and get in them. So you can put your complaint in writing. They've got an online form you can use. They've got an email address. You can post it. But if you really struggle with letters and that sort of thing, you can record an audio tape. You can make an MP3 file or like a video file and send it to them. Or if you call them, a member of staff will write the complaint and submit it on your behalf. So just in case you struggle with forms and that sort of thing, because it's not as easy for everybody. So your complaint will be dealt with between 3 to 4 working days. So they process it, it gets sent to a senior manager who then investigates. And it says that they will write to you within 10 working days and 20 working days. So which is really confusing because I'm not sure which, but I think we'll go with the 20 working days. Once they have received the response, if you're happy, it all stops. If you're not happy, you have to tell them, because then it can go on to a stage 2 complaint. So if you don't get back to them, it will all get dropped. You should get back to them and tell them if you want to go on to a stage 2 complaint within 20 working days of receiving the response from the stage 1 complaint. In a stage 2 complaint, an investigating officer will be appointed to look at the issues, and a full response should be given to you in no more than 65 working days. And again, if you are dissatisfied with this, you can then let them know within 20 days and it will go on to a stage 3. So at a stage 3, they have a review panel of 3 independent people, and they will then make recommendations to Children's Services about what changes need to be made. Appropriate member of senior staff will then talk about kind of what, whether they're going to accept this, because it's only recommendations within 15 working days. Once you've gone through all of this, then that's kind of it for their complaints procedure. I think that it's always worth thinking to yourself, do you want the stress of the complaints? Because I think you can see that even with a stage 3 complaint, you've only got an independent panel making recommendations to them. So there is that kind of, thing where what will it change for you, and try and have that in mind, or whether or not you want the stress. However, once this complaint procedure is completed, you do have further options. You don't have to just let it die with this complaints procedure. So you can go on to the local government ombudsman service. So but that could be anything up to 26 weeks to decide, and more complicated cases can take longer, which I know is a long time when you're waiting and you're trying to get things done. But the local government ombudsman service, they do publish what their results. They'll stick it in newspapers and on their website to say this is what we found regarding the county council. They can also order small amounts of compensation. So say if the speech therapist went off on maternity leave, and ever since then you have been paying for speech therapy for your child, despite the fact it's actually in section F of your child's EHCP, the local government ombudsman service may well order the county council to reimburse you, because actually it was their responsibility to pay for that. So it is worth going to them, but it, like you can see, is a 26 weeks time frame. It's not a quick fix. So you have to have followed the complaint procedure of the organisation you're complaining about, but there are some caveats to that. So say if they don't respond to you within their published time frame, you can go straight on to the local government ombudsman service. Also, you can argue that there isn't time to go through the county council's full complaints procedure because the matter is too urgent. So say if you had a child out of education and they were not getting any kind of education, you could argue to the local government ombudsman service it wouldn't be a matter that you could go through all of their complaints procedure, because of the time it would take and the fact that your child will be out of education for that entire time. So you could argue that to the local government ombudsman service and try and take it to them without actually going through the whole procedure. The other thing that you could do is judicial review. Now, I will say judicial review is certainly something that the county council take notice of, but I would also say be really careful in that, say if you started a judicial review without legal advice and then you were to lose, you could be then liable for the county council's costs, and this could be thousands and thousands of pounds. So this is not something you should enter into lightly. Also, judicial review is a last resort, and this is something that you do when everything else has failed. So when you don't actually have your right to appeal, the county council isn't answering your phone calls, you've got no other recourse, and then this is something that you could have a look at. So a judicial review is a type of court proceeding. So there will be a judge, there will be a court, and they are basically reviewing a decision or action made by a public body. So it could be that they have failed to issue an EHCP, and you don't have your right to appeal because your right to appeal is long gone and you're stuffed in no man's land, and you're kind of waiting. You could judicially review their decision not to issue that. We would most definitely say you get legal representation for this. It can be very, very costly if you have to self-fund. You can look at legal aid. So you can have a look at legal aid in your name, but also maybe legal aid in your child's name. There has to be a pre-action protocol letter. So you have to say to the county council in a letter, this is what we're going to do, this is what my complaint is. And normally that letter costs a few £100s to have it drafted by a solicitor. And sometimes that letter is all you need. So sometimes they'll receive that letter and then your issue will be fixed and you won't actually need to go the rest of the way. Judicial review is adversarial by nature. So it isn't something that will win you any friends. So it is something that you would do only if there's a last resort and that good relationship and that good communication is not there. Yeah, so it is something that you've got to be careful with. It's a very, very powerful tool, but it's something you really got to be careful with. I'm just saying that because I don't want any of you to end up with massive legal bills and then we say Adele told us to do it. All right, so NHS Services, so you can complain about CAMS. I know I'm just saying CAMS, I mean, you can complain about speech therapy, any of your NHS services, but we get a lot of people asking about how do they complain about CAMS, and it could be that CAMS has literally just refused to see your child, or it could be that you are actually with CAMS, but they're refusing to do an ADOS assessment, or you're not getting any kind of help from them. So they have it like this called the Patient Advice and Liaison Service. So you can write to them or email them or give them a call. They will listen to you and try and resolve your concerns. They will go and speak to people involved, so like people at CAMS, and see if they can resolve things for you on your behalf. And they can signpost you to other organisations, and hopefully it will help improve their service. So yeah, I think that people often don't want to complain about NHS services, but I think the more people that kind of feedback about services, hopefully the better that they will be. Yeah, so I hope that's kind of covered like my sorts of common complaints that parents would like to make. But yeah, so I'm hoping that that kind of answers people's questions and complaints. If anyone has any other, I can see there's people in the chat. Sarah, do you want me to read chat, or do you want to do it?
Can you see it? Oh, that's me putting bit. I don't think there's any questions in chat that you can see. It's just bits that I'm putting in. I've got a few bits and pieces popping up, so hopefully fairly straightforward. Oh, hello. Well, I've lost you. Where's my safe screen gone? There we go. Okie dokie. So I've got, how do you complain about an independent school which a child is attending as named on their EHCP?
Okay, so the independent school should still have a complaints procedure. Have a look on their website. If it's not there, then ask them to email you a copy of their complaints procedure. So that will talk you through how things go. The county council still do have a duty to ensure that everything in Section F is being done. So do go back to the county council if they are not doing what they should be doing, because they've agreed to take your child and they've agreed that they can do all of the things in Section F. The only thing with an independent school you should be wary of is that they can just give notice to the local authority and ask that your child be placed somewhere else. Not saying that that's what they would do in response to a complaint, but your placement is less secure in an independent provision than it is in a maintained provision.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can't remember if you covered this, but should I make a complaint to the governing body?
Yes, you can. I mean, so if the complaint has been dealt with by the head teacher, or the complaint is about the head teacher, you can then go to the governing body. There should be someone on the governing body who deals with SEN, so you could particularly ask for them to review the decision, because they will hopefully have some SEND knowledge. So if the head teacher has dealt with the complaint and you're not satisfied, you can put that on to the governing body. Or if it is the head teacher you are complaining about, then you need to go straight to the governing body.
And I think certainly for our school, I know details of governors and so on should be available on the website, shouldn't it? On their website, on the school website, you should be able to find those details. My son is at an academy. Is the process the same?
They should still have a published complaints procedure. The only difference is it's the Department of Education who directly funds them. So if you follow their complaints procedure, then it'll go on to the Department of Education if you're not satisfied, because that's where they get their funding from. They don't get their funding from the county council.
Okay. Right. Couple of longer ones. What do you do as the next step when you have sent an email complaint to the Director of Children's Services and he hasn't come back to you, or within the timescales, or acknowledged receipt of the email?
Yes, that's Steve. I think they're asking parents not to go for Steve Crocker for complaints. I think they're asking for parents to go to the locality manager, whether that's Melissa Philby or Jen Greensmith or one of the senior officers. I think then you could go on to the local government ombudsman service, because they haven't then responded within their published timeframes. And you could say basically they're not allowing you to complain because they've not responded to you.
Yeah, and I know they go straight to Steve Crocker as one that's quite popular, but it doesn't actually necessarily sort of jump you up the queue, does it?
No, not always.
Okay. No. I'm just reading this one through. If you make a complaint against the local authority and then they start to do what you're complaining about, but then stop again, do you have to start another complaint, or can you move your existing complaint to stage 2?
If you're within the 20 days, then go contact them and say that you're still dissatisfied.
But I'm guessing that probably the 20 days has elapsed. They started off well, all good intentions, and then it's kind of faltered again. So does that mean start again? Yeah,
start again. But I think, if you have anything in writing or anything, because one of the things, if you've got it in writing, you can always go back to the person who wrote it and said, actually, look, this is what you said was going to happen. This is not what's happening. Or it did happen, but now it's stopped happening. So go back to the person who responded. Hopefully, if you've got that, I think that certainly with verbal things, to back things up in an email, to try and get things in writing, and then you've got somebody to go back to and say, look, you got it in black and white, this is what you agreed to do, you've not actually done that.
And it's slightly different, isn't it, to that scenario where you said, don't talk about history, in that actually the history is relevant to this. So I think I would probably, it is important that this is something that's ongoing, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's all part of the same complaint, because what the parent wanted was for something to be provided on a continuous basis, not for something to be started to be provided and then withdrawn again. So that's most definitely relevant. Yeah.
I'm just reading this next one. Something coming in. I'm trying to think if we covered it. I'm concerned my child has been discriminated against due to their disability. How do you complain under the Equality Act? Did we talk about that?
No, but that is disability discrimination. So you can actually, speak to them first. You might want to bring up the Equality Act with them, because it is quite surprising how many schools are not aware. The other thing that I tend to do is ask them to go to Hampshire Legal Services and check where they stand. So certainly for Hampshire SENDIASS, we've heard schools come up with some odd things, and we thought, oh, that's not legal. And we've said, well, just go check your position with Hampshire Legal Services, and then Hampshire Legal Services can tell them, actually, you'd be on really shaky ground with that decision. So that might be something, because you can, in a non-adversarial kind of friendly way, you can just say, will you please go check that decision and make sure that's lawful. if they come and they want to stand by that decision and you don't feel like that is lawful, there is a disability discrimination tribunal service which you can fill in some paperwork and then submit that, and that could then be held, could be heard, or you could use the school's complaints process. But that is something that we would certainly support parents with. But it also, we kind of try and think about, what does the parent want out of this? Because sometimes a parent will say, I'm never sending my child to that school ever again because they've, the way they've treated my child, we're not doing it. But then they still want to go through like this discrimination process. We think, well, what do you want out of it? Because at best, you're going to get an apology. That there's no compensation, there's nothing linked to that, except they might just say, yeah, you're right, we're sorry. And I just think that parents are so stressed and they've got so many different battles that they've got to deal with. I think you need to think about, do you have enough energy? Do you have enough time? And is it worth it enough? Because does your child care if they apologise? Or so I do think that it's worth considering how much energy and time these things take. I'm not trying to put people off. I just think that we've certainly spent hours and hours supporting parents through like disability discrimination processes, and the parents just got like an apology, and we kind of thought, well, what relevance does that have to the child, and will that really improve the child's life, especially if the parent has no interest in ever sending their child back to that provision?
Yeah, and I think that's really, really sound advice, because there's only so much emotional energy we all have, isn't there? The one that I hear quite often on that disability discrimination one is about toilet training, Adele, and schools and settings saying they can't accommodate a child because they're not yet toilet trained.
Yeah, so there's no hard and fast rule. Some schools will, and some schools say that they won't, because I think it's around personal care and it's around risk assessments. So I think I would definitely push back to the school and ask, why could you not do that? And can you please risk assess it? So I know that some schools have said, well, they need 2 adults. So to say a guard against allegations of, because it's intimate areas. But can they get around that? Because I think that the Equalities Act is all about like making those reasonable adjustments. So what reasonable adjustments can they make? What can they do to get around that issue? Because they can. They could be creative and get around it. I've known schools who've got, say, like, a kid who's 7 or 8 who's still got pull-ups, and they had like a chart on the wall telling the child step by step what they needed to do, and then they'd have an adult outside the door who'd be talking them through it and reassuring them, and then they taught the child to kind of go through that process to change the pull-ups themselves.
Which is also building independence, isn't it? Yes. Which is ultimately,
the
name of the game.
Yes. So it's about schools being creative and being proactive, and not trying to say, no, we won't do this.
Super. If you have had to do a pre-action letter, can you later complain about the situation that forced you to do this?
If you did a pre-action protocol letter, but then didn't go on to do a full judicial review, do you think?
Possibly. Do you want to, does the person who asked the question want to clarify, and we'll come back to that one? Now I've had a question which I don't know that you'll necessarily be able to answer as such, Adele, but we might be able to answer it around about. Someone said, could you please repeat or write down the names of the locality team that you just gave to contact instead of Steve Crocker? Now, what we're really trying to do is give people the correct process.
I actually do have this somewhere. I'm just going to see if I can screen share the actual thing.
Nice to see you, Adele.
Yes. I've got way too many tabs open. All right, let me just get rid of that and I'll bring up the tab, because I was actually just looking at it beforehand. Hey, yeah, so there's actually been a new team structure. So if I try and share that with you guys, and then you can see who it are, the different team managers.
Going back to that previous one about the pre-action letter, says didn't have to do a judicial review. So Don't know if that helps you anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, of course. Yeah. So if you sent in a pre-action protocol letter, but actually you didn't go on to judicial review, but the pre-action protocol letter did, they did receive it. They do normally, if there's a pre-action protocol letter, actually rectify the situation. But if they haven't, yeah, and yes, of course, yeah, you're free to use their complaints procedure. So this is the new SEND structure. Yeah, so you've got the different teams and their managers on this line here. So Melissa Philby, she's New Forest and Test Valley, so she's managing them. There's Jen Greensmith, she's Winchester and Eastleigh and Hart and Rushmore. You've got Pippa Demont, she is Fairham Gosport and Havant, and Kathy Smith, so she's East Hants and Basingstoke and Dean.
I think we're trying to find out if we can circulate it, because I mean it's diddly, isn't it? And
yeah,
I know John who asked. The thing is, there's only any point in knowing who your particular locality manager is, because then they're the person that you can actually direct something to. That's going up the chain, isn't it, from your caseworker?
Yeah.
Hopefully we have that. I will double check. I have a feeling that HPCN may have got that and may be able to share it, because I think it's something that people have asked about, and I know when I was in a meeting with Jane, we were talking about sharing it. Right. Sorry, I'm just reading a thing. If the SEND team haven't sent out all the consultations after the annual review, despite emailing twice that they have, but school have no record, who do I complain to? Now there are no spaces for our child for September. So I presume the issue there is that an annual review. Are you still with me, Adele, even though you're not?
Yeah, yeah, I am, yeah.
The EHCPs come through late, and then you get held up. Now, no spaces for our child for September. I presume that's there for a special setting, because in a mainstream you can still go in over PAN, can't you?
Yeah, so I think this is something we are hearing, where the SEND team have not been quick enough off the mark, and then all of the spaces then get filled. So I guess if what's happened is, so say you wanted like Maple Ridge, for example, and you were aiming for Maple Ridge and everything was good, but they didn't send out the consultation quick enough, they didn't get their act together, and then Maple Ridge is actually now full. If another school is now named in section I of the EHCP and that has been finalised and issued, you now have your right to appeal. So I wouldn't bother about complaining unless you particularly want to. What I would do is take them to the tribunal.
What the parents just messaged me to say, Adele, is that they still don't have the final, so they can't even go to that next stage yet, can they?
What I would do is tell them, issue the EHCP with no school name, just issue it. I want my right to appeal, and then you can go on to appeal. So I think the issue of full is not actually one of the reasons why they can say that your child cannot have a place at a particular school. So one of the reasons would be it's incompatible with the efficient education of others. So they will have to show that adding one more child will mean that the other children, and they have to name those children, and they have to say, and it has to be a significant detriment to those children's education before that defence will stand up. So I mean, it is worth exploring what is full, how full exactly are they, because a lot of the time they can go slightly over their numbers without it being a massive issue for them. But yeah, that is something you could ask them to just issue the final plan, get your right to appeal, and then appeal it to see if you can get the child in that way.
So you can appeal on the placement?
Yes, you can appeal, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you could complain that they haven't done things in a timely fashion as well. That would be something that you could complain about. But in terms of getting things resolved and getting your child into where they need to be, actually probably the tribunal process would be a better for you.
And it's a really hard thing to defend, isn't it? The fact that, you know, your child being in that school actually affects the education of others. It's a difficult one for them to actually put a case together for.
Yeah, especially if there are things the county council could do to make it so they wouldn't impact on the education of others, such as giving them more resources.
So it sounds like to push for that final and head to tribunal. Is there anything anyone can do, Adele, if you're just not getting the final despite pushing and pushing and pushing?
I would certainly go to their locality manager, to say, you know, say you're in Test Valley, you go on to Melissa Philby and say basically you want the final issued. If you don't get the final issued, you will make a complaint, and then you will go on to like the local government ombudsman service if they don't resolve things to your satisfaction. Generally speaking, that, you know, hopefully would get you a response. But I think that communication with the 10 team is the big thing. That is the most kind of difficult thing, is getting them you know, to read and respond to emails, to, you know, to pick up the phone and call you back when you've left messages for them. That is the biggest hurdle. I think once you get them kind of on the phone, I think that they're not going to
I know now that we've been asked to say to parents, if they don't get through on the phone, there's an email to email, because I know Jane Howard's trying to keep a track. What I would say is we've got a parent-led engagement on Tuesday the 22nd, where if you are having that problem, come along. You have the right to come off mic and to tell us what your problem is and get it out there, because it then sometimes it's just putting it, you know, in front of people. And I think sometimes that does make a difference, to say, look, you know, there is a hold up, I need to get this sorted. And it may or may not make a difference, but there's no harm in trying, is there?
I went to the ones that we did with Liz Flockerty a long time ago, and they were brilliant. You know, she actually took names and telephone numbers and email addresses, and, you know, personally kind of, I don't know if Jane will do the same, but it was certainly worth attending if you're able to.
We certainly have some where you come away feeling like we've resolved a lot of issues today. Not all of them.
Yeah.
But some of them we definitely do. Right, I've got another one here. If the school don't submit the paperwork to the local authority after an annual review within the 2 weeks, so the school has, okay, how does this affect the time limits, and at what point can we complain if the local authority don't issue a draft DHCP? So the school has delayed sending the paperwork. That sounds like the school doesn't submit the paperwork, and therefore that's mucked up the timescales for the follow-up. Am I right though, Adele, that there's two different things going on there? Because the annual review, after an annual review, you get a letter to say whether or not it's going to be maintained, don't you, the EHCP? So the draft EHCP would come about if it was, what, a reassessment or a transition point?
Yeah, so if there were any changes or anything, so you'd get that opportunity to comment on it, just like it was when it was first made. But what I would say is, generally speaking, the local authority often has the legal duty to ensure that timeframes are met. So, you know, for instance, there's 6 weeks after someone makes a application for an EHCP, they have the duty to make sure the school respond within that time. So I would certainly contact the local authority if you're able to, and I mean, law, they have to respond within 4 weeks, the local authority. So I think they still need to keep to their deadlines about this, and they need to be chasing the school if they need additional paperwork from them.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, isn't it? There's so many different elements of who should be chasing who, and I think sometimes as a parent you're kind of like stuck between all these different elements of who is it actually that you need to go and chase. Is it the school? Is it the local authority? Is it NHS? Is it whoever? Sometimes it's a minefield. Right, well, I think I've gone through all of my questions. So if anybody else has anything, please do pop it on now. It's a huge area, isn't it, Adele? Absolutely huge. There's so many different ways you can complain, and different people you can complain to. I think the thing that I'm going to take away is that point of why are you doing it? You know, I think it's really important. If it's not actually going to improve the outcome for a young person, maybe save your energy.
Yeah, but we are trying to get parents to use the local government ombudsman service a bit more. There was a case recently, I don't know if anyone saw it, where a child had been out of education for a few months, and Hampshire County Council have been ordered to pay some compensation, but also they've been ordered to review whether or not they have sufficient funding to meet their deadlines. I think everyone is aware that Hampshire SEN is not funded properly, and they really do. I mean, 1.5% of the HCP is done within the 20 weeks. I think
an average in the country of 58%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we are looking at is more parents kind of going on to the local government ombudsman's service to raise the issue that they are not able to meet their statutory deadlines with their current resources. Yeah. So yeah, if you can and you feel able to kind of follow it on from that process, just to raise that issue.
And then benefit the greater good, isn't it? But because that is not an okay result under any circumstance. We're at the bottom of the pile, which is shocking.
Yeah.
Okay, so going a question back, referring to a question earlier. So coming back to my question earlier, re Steve Crocker, so the gentleman who had emailed Steve Crocker, should I just go straight to the local ombudsman? I think it depends what you're trying to do, doesn't it, Adele? Because that won't resolve your situation. It depends what you're trying to do. Whether you're trying to get a resolution for a provision or whether you're trying to raise awareness, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the local government ombudsman service is not quick. It's 26, weeks, and they can take to consider a claim and reply, which is quite a decent chunk of your year gone there. So if your child...
Sorry, Azal, the person's just said it's in trying to get a final EHCP. That's what they're trying to get to with these. Yeah,
so like if you wanted something quickly, then I would try the locality manager of the team. You ought to, you could perhaps, suggest that you might be willing to go on to the local government ombudsman service if you don't get, you could point out actually that you don't have to complete their full complaints procedure if they are not keeping to their deadlines in terms of responding to you. And you might be forced to go on to the local government ombudsman service if you don't get an appropriate response in a reasonable time frame. But maybe try the localities manager, because I know that if complaints go to Steve Crocker, his PA needs to sort them and then she needs to send them out to the appropriate team. So actually maybe it's delayed because of that. So maybe try going directly to the locality manager.
Yeah. And they're the ones who can actually make a difference, aren't they, ultimately?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we appreciate your frustration. It's where are we at for it? 15th of June, and if it's an EHCP for a placement in September, it's not really good enough, is it? Okay, thank you very much. We've covered a huge breadth today, Adele. All sorts of bits and pieces. I must admit, I didn't know a great deal about the local government ombudsman, so I've been sitting here taking little bits of notes as well. Right, just to tell you about a few more things that are coming up in the coming weeks. So we've got that next parent-led engagement session on the 22nd at 11 AM, and then a Meet the SEN on Friday the 25th. Parent-led engagement lets you come along and gives us a bit of an opportunity to explore your issue in a bit more depth, and there's no agenda, you lead the agenda. Meet the SEN, we have somebody from the SEN department, somebody from NHS, somebody from social, and there's usually more of a theme and questions are about the theme. And then we've got, I don't know if it'll be relevant to anyone here, but we've got a session about complex care on Monday the 28th, which is something a little bit different as well. So there's all sorts of bits and pieces going on. Do keep an eye on the HPCN and the local group pages. It's all on there. Thank you very much, Adele. That was really informative. Lots going on there. What we will do is we will save the presentation and we will put it up on YouTube so that you'll have the slides up there, because I know there was a huge amount of information on those, and you know, they're there then if you need them, and to come back with Adele's commentary, which is excellent. Just a couple of comments that it's nice to feed back to you here, Adele, saying thank you, it's been really helpful, wonderful, thank you both. So I think it's always nice to get some feedback. Thank you very much. Okie dokie, I am going to close the meeting and we will get the video up probably over the next few days. Thank you very much all for coming, and I hope to see you again soon.
Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.